this is a crazy story that I think is going to continue to get crazier. And it threatens the very foundation of women's athletics. And it also points to the cultural fault line, I would say, that exists right now, where so many people are afraid to say basic 100% certain truths, which are these. Men compete against men, and women compete against women in all athletics. The NCAA swimming championships are going to begin in less than 2 weeks. And there is a big Sports Illustrated exclusive with the transgender swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania, who is poised to potentially, despite the fact that this swimmer swam with the men for 3 years before deciding to become a woman, has been setting all sorts of, and I'm using quotation marks here, women's swimming records all over NCAA sports this spring and, I guess this winter. And this new swimming competition, now this women's swimmer who calls herself Lia Thomas is going to compete, potentially set all-time records at Georgia Tech down in the Atlanta area for the NCAA Women's Swimming Championships, and also is now saying that she, he, whatever phrase you want to use to describe this swimmer, wants to be on the women's swimming team in the Olympics in 2024. So if you think it's already a crazy story that a man can swim for 3 years as a man in men's swimming and then change teams and become a woman and become the greatest women's swimmer potentially in the history of college athletics, that now this swimmer wants to become a member of the women's swim team. Now, let me just give you this let's take it outside of the world of men's and women's athletics. Every single boxer out there, anyone who's ever been a fan of boxing, knows that there's heavyweight boxers, Buck, big, strong dude, 6 foot more. You weigh over 220 pounds. Big, the biggest guys out there. Do not fight against the smallest guys. If you look at Little League, I coach Little League baseball, I coach Little League basketball. I don't get to bring in a 17-year-old to play in my 11-year-old basketball league or my 11-year-old baseball league. Guy would be a lot better because he's a full-grown man. This is a direct attack on women's athletics. It would, in theory, create the end of women's athletics because as soon as you allow men who are bigger, stronger, and faster than women to identify as women and compete against them and beat them, it is an absolute destruction. And we're not getting, and this has got me so fired up, Buck, all these people out there who claim to be big feminists, all these people who claim to care so much about Title IX and women's equality, they're all silent, and they're complicit in this craziness.
This was all predictable. And what was fascinating was as this played out, I'd say over the last 10 years in particular, the trans agenda as it relates to sports issues, we were always told in the early days, I'm sure you remember this, that's not going to happen.
It's exactly what we were told.
No one's saying that. Just be polite. Just be nice. This is about being nice. This is about being decent to people. Use their preferred pronouns. Agree with them. Just do this because you're being a nice person. I really hate, and this is used often against people on the right in this country, because I think that, and I know people would argue with this over they'd say, well, Trump might have changed that in some way, but I think conservatives have a culture of politeness and consideration. I think that I just believe that. Maybe people could argue with me. And this is now about trying to take what started out as courtesy, using someone's preferred pronoun, and just deny objective reality. That's the transition, if you will, that we have been witness to here. And there's a lot of the same way that they were making arguments, Clay, about masks. Oh, come on, it'll make people feel better. It's fine. And ignoring the downside. Let's just talk about that for a second here, because all you ever hear from the media is this is about someone's affirmation and this is about, who they are as a person, all this sort of stuff.
Which is the way the entire Sports Illustrated article is written, not surprisingly, as if this person is a hero.
What about the Olympic hopeful on the U.S. or any team for that matter, who has lived like a third of her life in a swimming pool to be at the absolute top of that sport who will possibly now go to the Olympics and lose out on a gold medal, lose out on any medal, lose out on a spot on the team entirely. What about the lack of kindness and courtesy for that person? This is just like when we're talking about, let the transgender youth, in high school use the girls' locker room. It'll make them feel better. Well, what about the 12-year-old girl that now has to get dressed next to a biological male, also known as a male? This is why, it started out with just use the preferred pronoun, just be nice to people. And we want to be nice. We want to treat everybody well. But at some point, you can't live by lies. And Lia Thomas is living by a lie here. Lia Thomas, you can change your name. It's fine. Call this person Lia. But even in all the news coverage of it, it's always a situation where Lia Thomas is referred to as a she. Lia Thomas is not a she. And once you start with the basic, I'm gonna make this concession that gender cannot be changed. That's not reality. It's not scientific reality. But also just on the losses that will occur because of this to people. Lia Thomas is not the last person who's going to do this. And think of all the people along the way who feel like not only are they missing out on medals and spots on teams, Clay, but at some level their sport is being made a mockery of now. This is absurd. Women's swimming is being made a mockery of by the reality of not actually segregating anymore by gender. This is absurd.
Well, what's also wild about this, Buck, is we talk so much about improper benefits in the world of athletics. And so take it outside again of transgenderism. And if you are taking steroids, for instance, we're living down in Houston where Roger Clemens was, right, for a large part of his career, if I remember correctly. If you're able to be bigger, stronger, and faster through using drugs, you aren't allowed to compete. They test you for the Olympics, right, to see whether or not you're using prohibited substances. How in the world is changing your gender not considered to be a prohibited substance? Just follow me on this logic. If you can get Barry Bonds, let's use Barry Bonds as an example. Most people know him. Great player, decides that he's going to use steroids, becomes the home run king of Major League Baseball, gets caught using steroids, and Congress investigates what is going on with steroids in baseball. You can argue whether or not Congress should get involved, but the idea was the inherent fair play of athletics demanded that Congress investigate, and also because we didn't want to encourage 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds out there to shoot themselves up with drugs. Back in the day, the East German women dominated in the Olympics because they were using steroids. Same thing happened with Russians, right? They were doping. They were using all sorts of illegal substances. How is that impermissible? But you are going to say a man can decide to turn himself into a woman by using drugs, and then that man can dominate women's athletics, and that's considered to be okay. And I'll give you an example of what you were just hinting at, Buck. My guys did a great job, and girls, covering this at Outkick, and still are, because most people won't touch it in the world of sports. One of the girls on the Penn swimming team who didn't want her name to be used said that when she grows up and gets married and has her own kids, she hopes that she has boys, because if she has girls, her fear is transgender men who have decided to become women are going to end women's athletics. She said what you pointed out. Right now, it's one person who is dominating in women's sports. But what happens when there's 15 people dominating women's sports? What happens when the sprinting at the Olympics is all dudes who have decided to be girls?
And who thinks that there's not going to be an increase in this? We're talking about the Olympics. You be a college swimmer, you obviously don't make a dime, and swimming is not in general a big money draw for anybody until you're talking about being a gold medalist.
Yes.
Gold medalist is they've done analysis to show it's worth seven figures, right? It's worth a few $1 million,
especially in a sport like swimming where people pay attention at the Olympics.
There's actual endorsement value to that. Well, now you get to be a hero to those who are on the ideological left for doing this. Because they don't think this is bad. The true hardcore left in this country thinks that this is to be celebrated, and if you don't celebrate it, you're a bigot. That is the official party line. Ask AOC. Ask anybody who's a Democrat on the left who is prominent in the movement, and they'll say, this is great. I celebrate this. Lia Thomas is a hero, a civil rights hero. They're completely insane, but put that aside
She
for a
called
second.
herself reportedly the Jackie Robinson of women's swimming.
I mean, that is so offensive.
I mean, that's crazy, right? Now there's been a dispute about whether that quote was out there, but that report has been out there that one of her teammates said that she is referring to herself as the Jackie Robinson of women's swimming.
Unbelievable. And yet here we are. This is once you have people that are going to become millionaires. Now your choice is become transgender, be a multimillionaire and a hero to the left, or be an obscure,
just an okay
athlete,
male swimmer.
An okay male swimmer. What's the choice going to be for a lot of people? I think we all recognize. And by the way, this is going to be increasingly normalized too. That's the whole point. So this won't even be a thing that gets a lot of attention. That is the true goal of the movement here is essentially you can't make any gender distinction when it comes to sports competition, which can we all just remind ourselves? We all know this is crazy, right? Everyone listening to this knows it's crazy. Democrat Party, Nancy Pelosi will not denounce it. Joe Biden will not denounce it. Top to bottom, they'll go along with it.
No woman, Buck, would ever win an Olympic medal again if we only had a unisex sport, right? If every sprinter, and here's a great example. We're down in Texas right now. Every single high school boy who set a Texas State sprinting championship record was faster than the fastest woman who's ever existed in the most recent state competition. There's a big difference. Women would never win. This is the destruction of women's athletics if it continues to grow, which it will.